Hello everyone, today we are going to discuss resource and development, and in this particular video we are going to focus on resource development and its planning. The question is why resource development is important, and the answer is that the resource development is important because some resources cannot be used directly, so they have to be processed to make them useful for satisfying our wants. But then again, the question is what is the development of resources in the first place? So, to answer this question, it is that it is the process of developing the resources in order to make them useful for satisfying human wants. Because you see, there are so many resources available in our world. But see, not all of them can be used directly. They must go through a process to actually make them useful to satisfy any human want, and that is what we call development of resources. For example, we have that there is a lot of land, but land needs to be cleared and plugged for growing crops, and water has to be taken to the field to irrigate it. But if I just give you a piece of land, in itself that piece of land will not be very useful until and unless we go through the process of clearing it, then plugging it, and then getting water to that particular place so that crops can be grown in the first place, right? That is what we call development of resources. In the same way, we have huge amount of sea waters, right? But we can't use it for drinking. So to make it useful for drinking, that water has to go through so many processes in order for us to actually drink it safely, and that is what we refer to as development of resources. Great. Now let's look at some of the problems created by indiscriminate use of resources by men. So you see, the problem in this world is that men start using a technology and then keeps on using it over and over again till the point it becomes harmful using it in the first place. And that is what has happened with the resources of this world. A lot of problems has been created because human beings have started to overuse those resources to the point now that actually using them causes us a lot more trouble than it gives us benefit. So what are these problems? The first is many resources got depleted, like the forest. As you can see, you read in newspapers every day that the forest cover is actually depleting at a very fast rate, right? So that is a huge problem. The second is that resources got accumulated in the hands of few people and the society is divided into rich and poor. So you see every day, even in your everyday life, you see that there are some rich people who are like very rich while the poor are very poor. And every day the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting much more poorer. And that is the issue. And why it has happened? Because resources have been accumulated in the hands of the rich people and poor people have no access to it. That is why they are not able to utilize those resources to uplift themselves from the status of poverty. And this has created a lot of economic divide. So what do we call the difference between rich and poor when it has actually exceeded too much? It is called an economic divide. And the third is that we all know is global warming, which is one of the major concerns of the entire planet. The next is ozone layer depletion, which is actually causing the Earth's UV rays to penetrate us and actually give us, cancer and other kind of problems because the UV rays from sun are actually very harmful. And the next is environmental degradation, especially when we talk about removing forests. So the air gets polluted, the sand erosion happens, and so many other problems happen when we start indiscriminate use of resources. Got it? Now let's look at some of the sustainable economic development. So the economic development which does not damage the environment and at the same time takes care of the needs of the future generation is called sustainable development. To simplify it, sustainable economic development is nothing but just taking care of your present needs at the same time understanding that the future generation will have their own needs, right? So it is meeting the okay, so you know what, if I classify sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present while taking care of future needs of the coming generation. This is basically what sustainable development is. This means that we just don't keep on using resources to the point that none are actually left for the future generation. Because there is a very, very beautiful quote which says that we have not inherited this planet from our ancestors. We have actually borrowed it from our future generations. And the same way, we need to understand that we have to keep environment clean and we must leave Earth a better place than we found it. That is what sustainable economic development is all about. And why it is important? Because many of the resources are non-renewable and exhaustible. And I know that you already know what does non-renewable and exhaustible means. This means that we cannot just get more of them very easily, and if we keep using them at the same rate we are now, they will at some point in this life get exhaust. So there will be no more of them anymore. And over exploitation of these resources will affect the needs of our future generation. Imagine a world where we have exhausted all the resources to the point that they have been completely depleted. And now we have left the world and now it is up to our future generations. But we leave them with nothing, no resources to actually use and utilize in order to improve and grow as a human society. That is a very, very bleak future that no one in this world should live in. The second important point why sustainable development is important, because environmental pollution has become a major threat to the survival of human beings. Well, depleting resources is one thing, but imagine a world where the world doesn't exist. And that is what environmental pollution is going to do. It might not remove Earth from existence, but it sure will remove human beings, especially at the pace we are degrading our environment. See, what happens is that human beings need a certain kind of temperature and environment and the biosphere to sustain. But if we keep altering that biosphere to the point that it doesn't even exist anymore, that creates a problem for human existence itself. And that is the environmental pollution that must stop. And how do we stop it? By adopting the practices of sustainable development. Also, if you want to read more, you can go onto the UN website and study about the sustainable development goals which has been given by the UN to each and every country. And countries then go on and start following those rules in order to create a better world to live in for everyone. Great. Now let's look at some of the resource planning. Now, resource planning is a technique or skill of proper utilization of resources. This means that when we have planning in hand of the resources, the utilization of resources is proper and to the point that we are exploiting them, not actually exploiting them, but using them till their highest potential. And that is what resource planning is all about. So there are 3 stages of resource planning. The first is identification and listing of resources. Surveying, mapping and the measurement of the qualities and the quantities of the resources are important activities undertaken at this stage. What do we understand by this? We understand that first we have to do, before we actually start planning of the resources, our first step should always be to understand what resources are located at what places, in how much quantity and in what quality are they present. Because once we know that, then we can actually start planning on how to utilize those resources. Secondly, we have to plan for exploitation. So here we have to develop a planning structure with suitable technology, skill and institutional setup. And when we do that, then we can start extracting those resources and exploiting it for our own needs. And the third is match resource development plans with national development plans. So see, resource planning is very important for every country, because apart from resource planning, they also have national development plans, right? Because if there is a national development plan to open up a coal factory, then we have to mine coal, we have to extract coal. So we have to plan resource development in alignment with the national development plans. Great. Now let's look at the importance of resource planning. So why resource planning is actually important? It is necessary for balanced development of India. So here we are talking about importance of resource planning in India. So some regions of India are rich in certain resources and poor in some other resources, right? Like Rajasthan is poor in water and water resources but rich in solar and wind energy. So once we know that Rajasthan is poor in water resources, we won't actually deploy our current resources to find water in Rajasthan, because that would be a waste. But we could spend a lot of money in using the potential of solar and wind energy in Rajasthan. In the same way, some regions are self-sufficient while the other regions are very poor in important resources. In the same way, you will see some states and some regions which are very self-sufficient and they do not need any external resources to sustain in day-to-day lives. Like Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh is rich in resources, but Ladakh is poor in resources and must import from time to time the important resources to sustain. In the same way, resource planning is very important because wastage of resources can be avoided by planning. Fourth, which is environmental pollution can be reduced, of course, as we already talked about it. And the third is over exploitation of resources can be avoided. Because once we have a proper plan, we know how much to extract, how much to use and how much to exploit a particular resource. Therefore, over exploitation is avoided. Now let's talk about resource conservation. So what is resource conservation? Resource conservation is nothing but planned use of resources in order to meet the present needs and to store a part for the future generation. It's called resource conservation. Does this definition actually click a bell? Because earlier we talked about sustainable development and now we are talking about resource conservation. Yes, you must have guessed it right already that resource conservation does have a very similar meaning to sustainable development. And if a country is going through sustainable economic development, they are also in line with resource conservation. Now, why resource conservation is important? It is important once again because many resources are non-renewable and exhaustible. And if we conserve them, we can use them for a longer period of time. Next, conservation of resources helps us to reduce wastage, which helps us in economic progress. Very straightforward point once again. And the third is resource conservation helps us to protect the environment. The same we have talked about in earlier slides. Now let's look at some of the ideas of Gandhiji about the conservation of resources. Now according to Gandhiji, there is enough for everybody's need, but not for anybody's greed. Now this is a very, very beautiful quote by Gandhiji. And what it is trying to tell us that the world we live in has too many resources. And if we talk about only the needs of the people, they will always be satisfied. But the problem comes in when people start being greedy. So if we talk about the entire population, according to Gandhiji, everybody's need can be satisfied, but not even one person's greed can be satisfied with the entire resources of our world. See, the greedy and selfish individuals and the exploitative nature of modern technology are the root cause for resource depletion. So what are the root cause for resource depletion? Greedy and selfish individuals and the exploitative nature of modern technology. And Gandhiji was also against mass production of things, and he wanted to replace it with production by the masses. You see, when things got starting producing by the masses, everyone prospers at the same time. On the other hand, if things are being produced in mass, then only a few high net worth individuals are benefiting from it. And that were the ideas of Gandhiji. Now with this, we have come to the end of this video, and I'm sure that all of you have understood this video and understood how resources are developed at the same time how they are planned. Great. Now I would like to request all of you to go through the documents available on the EduRev app and see how well you are doing. Come back to the videos if you need revisions, and you can also attempt tests if you feel confident. With this, I hope you understood everything well and have a happy learning with EduRev.